The quiet rust. The sign was almost swallowed by the overgrown kudzu. Harmony Creek, EST 1888. The American Heartbeat. Tom Vance didn't slow the beat-up Ford pickup. He just kept driving, the cab thick with the smell of old dust and regret. 22 years he'd been gone, chasing bank robbers and white-collar ghosts in the glittering cities of the East Coast, only to be dragged back by two things: a crumbling farmhouse he'd inherited and the echo of a shot he couldn't unhear. Harmony Creek, Ohio. Once, it had been the engine room of the Rust Belt, the air thick with the metallic tang of the Harmony steel mill. Now, the air was just thick with silence, a sticky quiet that clung to the empty storefronts on Main Street. The mill itself was a sprawling, skeletal ruin by the river, its vast furnaces cold, its smokestacks like accusing fingers pointed at a gray sky. He pulled up to the only diner that still seemed to be open, a faded yellow box called The Junction. Inside, the light was dim and the linoleum floor worn into the shape of 1,000 forgotten footfalls. Every head, there were only 4, turned as the bell above the door jangled. Tom was a big man, not heavy, but solid, built like a retired linebacker who still hit the heavy bag. His once sharp FBI suits were replaced by jeans and a denim jacket, but the intensity in his blue eyes hadn't dulled. He sat at the counter. A woman with tired eyes and an apron smeared with old grease slid him a coffee mug. Her name tag read Muriel. "You ain't from around here, mister," Muriel said, her voice gravelly, but not unkind. "I grew up here," Tom said, taking a slow sip of the weak, black coffee. Tom Vance. Muriel stopped wiping a spot that wasn't there. Her eyes narrowed, the recognition dawning slowly, like a sunrise over a perpetually cloudy day. "Jimmy Vance's boy. Thomas." "Just Tom," he corrected. A long silence followed, broken only by the hiss of the fry grill. In Harmony Creek, knowing the name meant knowing the history, the alcoholic father, the failed marriage, and the son who ran off to become something more. "What brings a big city G-man back to the creek?" she finally asked. "My old man's house needs fixing up. And—" he hesitated. "I heard about the girl, Lydia Mayhew." Muriel stiffened, her face hardening into the familiar, protective mask that small towns wear when outsiders pry. "That's Sheriff Becker's business," she snapped. "Not yours." "Becker was my high school guidance counselor," Tom said dryly. "And I was still FBI when Lydia went missing 3 weeks ago. I figured I could offer a hand, informally." Lydia Mayhew, 17. A scholarship kid, working 2 jobs, planning to escape Harmony Creek and its cycle of decay. Her disappearance had been plastered on the local news for a week, then quietly faded. Another statistic in a place where desperation was the main export. She didn't just run off, Tom pressed, leaning in. She was saving money to go to college in Pittsburgh. Her bags were packed. Muriel sighed, defeated. She leaned over the counter, dropping her voice to a whisper that barely cleared the steam rising from the coffee urn. "It's the dust, Tom. Everyone thinks she got pulled into the dust." He knew what she meant. Fentanyl. The opioid crisis had gutted the American heartland, turning once vibrant communities into zombie towns. They called the potent, often adulterated street drug the dust because it settled over everything, choking the life out of the young ones. "And you think she OD'd somewhere and they covered it up?" Tom asked. Lydia wasn't that type. Straight edge, church on Sundays. But Muriel looked away, toward the street where the bare branches of an oak tree scratched against the window pane. "The dust runs everything now. The mill's closed, the banks are gone, but the money still flows. And it flows through a few chosen hands." Before she could say more, the bell above the door jangled again. A man walked in, mid-50s, massive frame straining the polyester uniform. His face was a road map of hard living and poor sleep, topped by a gray, ill-fitting Stetson hat. "Sheriff Becker." Becker spotted Tom immediately. He didn't smile. Well, look what the cat dragged in," Becker boomed, his voice too loud for the small space. He walked over, his eyes sizing up Tom with an aggressive, almost territorial hostility. "Agent Vance. Thought you were busy saving the free world." "Just Tom now, Sheriff," Tom replied, his tone even. "Early retirement. My father's house. You remember it. The money pit on Locust Ridge? Must be nice. What happened?" "Couldn't handle the big leagues." Becker let the insult hang in the air. Their rivalry was old, rooted in high school football and the class divide. Becker, the golden boy of the established families. Tom, the working-class kid who fought his way out. I heard about Mayhew, Tom stated, ignoring the jab. What's the official word? Becker took the stool next to Tom, signaling Muriel for a coffee. Runaway juvenile. It happens, Tom. She was dealing with stress, pressure. Maybe met some fellow online. We checked the bus station. Nothing. Her phone's off. Case is cold. 3 weeks cold. Tom raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like the Harmony Creek I remember. We used to care about our own. We do care, Becker growled, his jaw clenching. But this isn't the 1990s, Tom. This town is broken. People disappear every day, swallowed by the dust, the debt, the despair. The mill closed, and the community died. We can only chase so many ghosts. Tom felt a familiar pressure behind his eyes. He'd seen plenty of dead ends in his career, but this felt different. It felt forced. Did you interview Richard Thorne? Tom asked, throwing out a name. Becker went rigid. Richard Thorne was the owner of the defunct steel mill, one of the last prominent old money families in Harmony Creek, and now, suspiciously, the owner of most of the foreclosed properties in town. Thorne? What the hell would Thorne have to do with a missing girl? Becker scoffed, but the question sounded more like a warning. He owns the town, Sheriff. And I heard Lydia worked at his renovated luxury apartment complex, the one he's struggling to fill on the riverfront. Cleaning crew. She was there the night she disappeared. Becker stood up, scraping the stool against the linoleum. You stick to fixing your porch, Vance. This isn't your jurisdiction. And let me give you a piece of advice. The FBI life is over. Harmony Creek doesn't like busybodies, especially not failed ones. He slapped $1 on the counter for the coffee he hadn't touched and marched out. Tom watched him go. He knew Becker was wrong. Lydia Mayhew hadn't simply run away. She had stumbled across something she shouldn't have, something that scared the powerful few who still controlled the dying town. He finished his bitter coffee. The weight of the steel and the silence felt suddenly heavier, yet strangely familiar. He wasn't here just to fix a house. He was here to fix a mistake. And maybe, just maybe, he could save one person before Harmony Creek finally consumed itself. The hunt had begun, not for a runaway, but for a truth buried beneath the rust. The Vance farmhouse on Locust Ridge was a monument to neglect. Paint peeled like sunburned skin, and the porch sagged under the weight of decades. Tom spent the late afternoon wrestling with the fuse box, the wiring inside having long since given up on the 21st century. The isolation here was profound, exactly what he'd come for, but the silence felt less like peace and more like a heavy accusation. He took a break as dusk settled, the air turning crisp and smelling faintly of wood smoke and river rot. He wasn't looking forward to the conversation, but it had to happen. He drove his pickup toward the modest, cookie-cutter housing development near the edge of town, the kind of subdivision built quickly in the late 90s, when everyone still believed the mill would last forever. He found the Mayhew house. The yard was meticulously kept, a small, stubborn protest against the decay surrounding the town. A simple sign, hand-painted on poster board, was stuck in the lawn. Lydia, please call home. Tom knocked on the door. It was opened by a woman who looked 10 years older than her actual age. Her eyes were red-rimmed and perpetually searching, as if Lydia might suddenly materialize behind Tom. This was Sarah Mayhew, Lydia's mother. Can I help you? She asked, her voice hollow. Mrs. Mayhew, my name is Tom Vance. I'm a former FBI agent, recently moved back to Harmony Creek. I spoke to Sheriff Becker'ı about Lydia. At the mention of Becker'ı, Sarah's posture slumped further. He called it a runaway. Said we should wait. Said she'd come back when she ran out of cash or got bored. Her voice trembled with resentment. Lydia isn't a runaway. She's a good kid, Tom. She was our whole future. Tom stepped inside. The house was spotless, but oppressive, the air thick with unspoken fear. I believe you, Tom said, his voice quiet but firm. I believe something happened. Can you tell me about the last day you saw her? Sarah sat down heavily on the floral sofa, clutching a faded photograph of Lydia, a young girl with bright, hopeful eyes and a determined jaw. She worked the late cleaning shift at the Thorne Riverview Apartments. That's Richard Thorne's new project, right on the old mill site. Fancy place. She needed the money for tuition deposits. What time did she finish? Midnight. She usually texted me when she left. I'd be waiting up. That night, no text. I called, no answer. I drove down there at 1 a.m. Sarah's breath hitched. Her bicycle was locked up outside the service entrance, Tom. But she wasn't there. Her keys, her wallet, they were still in her backpack, inside her locker. The only thing missing was her phone. And Lydia. A locked bike, wallet left behind, but a missing person and a missing cell phone. This wasn't a runaway. It was a planned disappearance, or, more likely, an abduction. The cell phone was the key, either destroyed immediately or being used to create a false trail. Did anyone else work that late? Just the night watchman, old Elias Finn. But he's practically blind and deaf. He sleeps mostly. And the building manager, Mr. Douglas. But he lives off-site. Tom pulled out a small notepad. Did Lydia mention anything unusual recently? Did she seem stressed about work? Did she talk about meeting anyone new? Sarah wrung her hands. She was happy, excited. She was only 2 weeks away from getting the last payment needed for her deposit. But 2 weeks ago, she came home early, pale as a ghost. Why? She said she found something. At the apartments. Something she shouldn't have seen. She wouldn't tell me what. Just that it made her stomach turn. She said she was scared, but she needed to hold on just 2 more weeks for the money. This was the crack. The motive. Did she say where she found it? No. But those Thorne apartments, they're right next to the old mill grounds. Richard Thorne never fully cleaned that place up. It's all interconnected. Tom thanked her, promising to keep her updated. Leaving the Mayhew house, he felt a cold certainty. Lydia Mayhew had witnessed something related to the real business running Harmony Creek, the business that thrived after the mill died. The Thorne Riverview Apartments was a garish monument to misplaced ambition. It was a modern, glass and steel cube built right beside the rusting skeleton of the Harmony Steel Mill. The contrast was stark. One promised a luxury future. The other was stuck in the brutal past. Tom found Richard Thorne in the only occupied unit on the ground floor, which he used as a temporary office. Thorne, impeccably dressed in a custom suit that looked utterly out of place in Harmony Creek, was the definition of predatory capitalism dressed up as philanthropy. He was perhaps 60, but his hair was unnaturally black, and his face was too smooth. Tom Vance, Thorne greeted, offering a hand that felt oddly cold. Heard you were back. Sad circumstances, your father's passing. The circumstances are old news, Richard, Tom said, declining the formality. I'm here about Lydia Mayhew. Thorne settled behind a polished desk that looked like it cost more than the Vance farmhouse. A tragedy. A sad, unfortunate tragedy. The sheriff's office has my full cooperation, of course. The sheriff calls it a runaway. I call it an abduction related to something she saw here. Tom leaned forward, resting his fists on the desk. She was cleaning here late, the night she disappeared. Lydia was a diligent worker, Thorne conceded smoothly, and a very trustworthy girl, which is why this is so baffling. But abduction? Come now, Tom. Harmony Creek isn't Chicago. Who would abduct a cleaning girl? Someone protecting a secret worth more than Lydia's college fund. I heard she found something 2 weeks before she vanished. Something disturbing. Thorne didn't blink. He reached for a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. Bourbon, probably very expensive. Nonsense. This building is brand new. State-of-the-art security. What secret could she possibly find? Maybe not in the building, Richard. Maybe in the old mill grounds. You still own that land, don't you? You're sitting on a Superfund site waiting for a bailout. Thorne took a slow sip. That land is secured, fenced, and monitored. It's also toxic waste. No one goes near it. Least of all a clever girl like Lydia. She was focused on her future, Tom, not scavenging in hazardous debris. Tell me about the night watchman, Elias Finn. Old Elias? Sleepy, reliable. Been with the Thorne Company for 40 years. He patrols the perimeter. He's deaf as a post, which is why we have cameras. Did you check the security footage from that night? Of course. Sheriff Becker's team reviewed it. Clean as a whistle. Lydia clocks in, enters the service stairwell. She never clocks out. The footage shows no one entering or leaving the service area except her. And then, nobody. Tom felt a prickle of suspicion. Show me the footage. Thorne chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. I can't. The entire security system, the main server where the footage is stored, it all fried a few days after her disappearance. Lightning strike. Very unfortunate. Becker has the copies of the relevant hours they pulled. Lightning strike. In an area riddled with surveillance and industrial backup systems? Tom knew a convenient lie when he heard one. You're hiding something, Richard, Tom said, standing up. You're running something dirty through this town, and Lydia stumbled on it. Thorne rose too, taller than Tom expected, his smooth veneer finally cracking to reveal a cold, menacing certainty. Listen to me, Tom Vance. You came back here to lick your wounds from whatever mess you made in the bureau. Don't start a fight you can't finish. Harmony Creek is dead, but it still has teeth. My teeth. The disappearance of a girl working a late shift is a tragedy. The appearance of a rogue FBI agent digging up old grudges? That's a problem. The problem is, you're too confident, Richard. And confidence is the first thing that crumbles when the truth hits the light. Tom left the office, the sterile, expensive air replaced by the biting cold of the outside. The mill's ruin loomed in the distance. The security footage conveniently fried, the sheriff complacent, and a powerful man overly defensive. The dust wasn't just fentanyl. It was whatever Thorne was hiding, and it was poisoning the entire town. Tom realized he couldn't trust Becker or anyone in official power. He was truly alone. His first stop needed to be Elias Finn. The sleepy old watchman might have seen more than the cameras, or Thorne wanted anyone to know. Elias Finn lived in a tiny, prefab house near the outskirts of Harmony Creek, a relic of the mill's peak production era. When Tom knocked, the door was opened by a man who looked less like a security guard and more like a fragile bird, thin, stooped, and smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and old newsprint. Mr. Finn? I'm Tom Vance. I wanted to talk to you about Lydia Mayhew. Elias squinted. Lydia? Good girl. Always on time. Shame. He spoke slowly, deliberately, his voice raspy from decades of breathing mill dust. Tom stepped into a small living room cluttered with worn furniture and stacks of old VHS tapes. I understand you were on duty the night she disappeared from the Thorne apartments. That's right. Midnight to 6. My shift. Sheriff Becker said you mostly sleep. Is that true? Tom asked gently. Elias flushed slightly, a spark of indignation in his faded blue eyes. I got my routine. I check the perimeter. I check the loading dock. I mostly stay in the service booth, watching the monitors. But I ain't asleep. Just resting my eyes. Did you see anything unusual that night? Any vehicles near the service entrance? Anyone who shouldn't have been there? Elias rubbed his chin. Nah. Quiet night. Too quiet. Like the town when the mill went down. He paused, his gaze drifting towards a large, framed photograph on a shelf. A younger Elias in a hard hat, standing proudly next to a huge, molten vat of steel. I worked that mill for 40 years, son. I know quiet. That night was a grave kind of quiet. What about Lydia's bicycle? Was it normal for her to leave it locked outside? Yeah, always. She'd bring her backpack in, but the bike stayed out. But Elias leaned in, his tone dropping. I saw her come in. Around 10:30. Then, around 11:45, I saw her again. She was coming out. Tom frowned. Out. But Mrs. Mayhew said her keys and wallet were inside, and the footage showed her entering but not leaving. The footage is only for the service stairwell and hallway, Elias clarified, tapping his temple. I got the monitor that covers the old loading tunnel entrance. It's walled up now mostly, but there's a small utility access door. Thorne sealed it up years ago, said it was too much liability. Lydia went through that utility access door. She opened it. She was looking over her shoulder, real nervous. She had a small flashlight. She looked like she was retrieving something, not running away. She didn't have her backpack. She was only gone about 5 minutes. Then she came back in, shut the door, and went up the stairs to the locker room. And then she disappeared. According to the clock, she should have been cleaning the 7th floor by 12:30. She never made it. This was the first genuine lead, and it contradicted Thorne's and Becker's narrative perfectly. Lydia hadn't just vanished. She had gone to retrieve a crucial item hidden in the abandoned mill structure, returned briefly, and then been intercepted. Where does that utility door lead, Elias? The old man's eyes grew wide with fear. That tunnel. It leads right under the river, across the old factory floor, and out to the south end of the mill property. They used it to move specialized parts in the old days. But it's derelict now. Toxic. And it's the only way to get in and out of that mill without going over the main fence line. You wouldn't need to pass the security cameras at the gate. Did you tell Becker about this? Elias averted his gaze. I told him about the tunnel access. He told me the footage didn't show anything and that I was seeing things. Then, Mr. Thorne's manager, Douglas, he came by, told me I needed to keep my story straight if I wanted to keep my small pension. Tom realized the depth of the cover-up. Thorne wasn't just hiding a crime. He was using the town's dependency, the mill's ghost, to silence the vulnerable. Thank you, Elias, Tom said, pressing a folded $100 bill into the old man's hand. Don't tell anyone we spoke. Be careful, Tom, Elias whispered, clutching the money. That mill, it doesn't give up its secrets easily. Tom returned to the Thorne Riverview apartments just before midnight. The building was a dark monolith. He drove past the main entrance, finding the service alley. The building backed up directly onto the towering chain-link fence that demarcated the old Harmony steel mill property. He found the utility access door Elias had described. It was a heavy steel hatch, painted the same dreary gray as the surrounding concrete, virtually invisible. It was secured with a sturdy, modern padlock. Tom didn't bother trying to pick it. He walked back to his truck and retrieved a set of heavy-duty bolt cutters he'd bought earlier that day. A few loud, metallic snips, and the thick chain fell away. He pushed the door open. A gust of stale, humid air, reeking of rust, decay, and a sharp, chemical smell, rushed out. He switched on his high-powered flashlight. The tunnel was narrow and low-ceilinged, lined with crumbling concrete. The floor was wet and slick. He moved slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. This was the true underbelly of Harmony Creek, where the industrial dream had metastasized into an environmental nightmare. About 50 feet in, he stopped. Embedded in the wet concrete near the tunnel wall, he saw something small and shiny. He bent down and picked it up, a tiny, silver pendant shaped like a horseshoe. A horseshoe, a small token of luck. Sarah Mayhew had mentioned Lydia's grandmother had given her a lucky charm. Lydia had been here, and she had dropped this. He pressed on. The tunnel opened into the vast, cavernous interior of the abandoned mill. It was a cathedral of industry, now silent and terrifying. Huge cranes hung motionless high above, and enormous, rusting machinery stood like forgotten titans. Tom moved toward the center of the massive factory floor, dodging pools of noxious, standing water and heaps of debris. The silence here was absolute, amplifying the slightest sound, a drip, a creak of metal. He saw the area where the old blast furnaces had been. The floor here was stained black, but next to a crumbling concrete pillar, he saw a patch of cleaner concrete, as if something had recently been washed. And then he saw the indentation. It was faint, but unmistakable, a large, circular stain on the floor where a barrel, or perhaps multiple barrels, had sat, leaching their contents into the concrete. He knelt, shining the light directly on the stain. It wasn't oil. It was a sticky, reddish-brown residue, thick like old syrup. He ran his gloved finger over the stain and smelled it. It didn't smell like steel chemicals. It smelled vaguely sweet, medicinal, and earthy. This was a chemical residue, something processed here illegally. And then, the real discovery. Hidden in a small cavity behind the pillar, stuffed deep inside, Tom found what Lydia Mayhew had retrieved, a thick, leather-bound, old-school ledger. It was water-damaged and smelled faintly of the same sweet chemical. Tom opened it carefully. The ledger wasn't a list of sales or production logs. It was a meticulously kept record of names, dates, amounts, and payments. But instead of dollars, the currency was listed as O-units. O-units. Opioids. This wasn't just a local drug ring. It was a large-scale trafficking operation, using the abandoned mill as a clandestine, high-volume processing and distribution hub, perhaps even synthesizing the deadly fentanyl/heroin mix they called the dust. And the names, the bishop, the preacher, suggested a sophisticated, organized network reaching far beyond Harmony Creek. Tom felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with dread. He had stumbled into something far bigger than a missing person case. He had found the engine room of the opioid crisis, and it was running right under Richard Thorne's nose. Or, more likely, with his full participation. He tucked the ledger into his jacket. He needed to get out, secure the ledger, and analyze the data. Just as he turned to head back to the tunnel, a loud clang echoed from the factory floor above him. It sounded like a massive steel door slamming shut. He froze, extinguishing his flashlight immediately. He was no longer alone. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, began echoing on the metal catwalks high above. Someone was patrolling, and they knew he was there. A harsh, bright beam of light sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the enormous cavern, dangerously close to his position behind the concrete pillar. "I know you're down there," a deep, electronically modulated voice shouted. The voice sounded distorted and human. "Drop whatever you picked up and walk out slow, Vance. You just trespassed on federal property." Tom realized the true danger. This wasn't Elias Finn's replacement. This was a professional security detail running a highly illegal operation. He had the ledger. He had the truth. But now, he had to survive the silence of the steel graveyard. Tom held his breath, the chemical stench of the mill filling his lungs. The powerful searchlight swept past his hiding spot. He calculated his odds. Unarmed, against what sounded like one, possibly two, armed men in an environment they knew better than he did. The voice crackled again. "Last chance, Vance. We don't want to hurt you. But Mr. Thorne gets very agitated when people touch his paperwork." Tom realized the lightning strike that conveniently destroyed the security footage at the apartments was likely the same method Thorne used to destroy evidence here. And now, they were trying to recover the original evidence, the ledger. He made his move. He bolted away from the pillar, not toward the tunnel, but further into the mill's interior, seeking the cover of the gigantic, rusting machinery. The sound of his boots on the metal floor was deafening. Crack! A gunshot echoed through the mill, a high-powered rifle, the sound sharp and brutal. A piece of concrete exploded right where Tom's head had been moments before. He sprinted behind a massive, abandoned cutting lathe, its gears covered in cobwebs. He could hear the footsteps descending the metal stairs, closer now. He knew he couldn't outrun them in the open. He needed a distraction, and he needed a weapon. He spotted a heavy section of rusty chain hanging from a defunct pulley system nearby. He grabbed it, the metal cold and rough in his hand. The guard, a large figure in dark tactical gear, carrying the rifle, appeared around the corner of the lathe, his searchlight blinding. "Hands up," the guard yelled, aiming the rifle. Before the guard could stabilize the shot, Tom swung the heavy chain like a whip, aiming for the light. The chain struck the spotlight with a sickening smash, extinguishing it and plunging the immediate area into total darkness. The guard let out a guttural curse, disoriented. Tom used the momentary cover to charge. He tackled the guard low, driving his shoulder into the man's stomach. They hit the grimy floor with a painful thud. The rifle skittered away across the concrete. Tom was older, but his FBI training kicked in. He targeted the guard's wrist, twisting until the man cried out and released a heavy-duty shock baton he was holding. Tom seized the baton and slammed it into the guard's side. The guard, surprisingly strong and determined, managed to land a heavy blow to Tom's jaw. The world swam for a second. "You should have stayed retired," the guard grunted, grappling for Tom's neck. Tom recognized the voice, stripped of the electronic distortion, but thickened with rage. It was Mr. Douglas, the manager of the Thorne apartments, the one who lived off-site and allegedly cooperated with Becker. "You killed her, Douglas?" Tom gasped, struggling under the manager's weight. Douglas's eyes, visible in the faint ambient light from the mill windows, were cold and empty. She saw the delivery. She was smart. Too smart. Richard couldn't risk the whole operation for one stupid girl. Tom used every ounce of his strength, rolled, and brought the shock baton down hard on the side of Douglas's head. The manager went limp, collapsing onto the greasy floor. Tom didn't wait. He snatched up the rifle, a specialized, suppressed weapon, and grabbed the keys from Douglas's belt. He needed to disappear before Douglas's partner, or Thorne himself, showed up. He sprinted back toward the tunnel entrance, his heart pounding. He burst through the utility door, locking it behind him with the manager's key. He threw the bolt cutters, the rifle, and the baton into the river, scrubbing his hands clean in the fetid water. He drove back to Locust Ridge, shaken but alive, the leather ledger secured beneath the floorboards of his pickup. He had the motive, the location, the weapon, now submerged, and the name of the probable killer, Douglas. But he also had the ledger, the one thing Thorne would do anything to retrieve. Back in the dim, dusty safety of the Vance farmhouse, Tom spent the next 2 days poring over the ledger. He rigged a temporary power source and began inputting the data into an old laptop he'd brought with him. The ledger was a masterpiece of organized crime. It spanned 3 years, detailing the escalating production and distribution of O units, fentanyl/heroin mix. The twist: the ledger didn't just list customers and payments. It listed the source of the ingredients. They weren't being imported. They were being sourced domestically under a cover operation. The ingredient labels, precursors for the deadly synthesis, were disguised as industrial cleaning agents and specialized chemical compounds for Harmony Creek Reclamation Project. And the shipments were all routed through a single, legitimate-looking front company based out of Columbus, Ohio, Thorne Industrial Holdings. Richard Thorne wasn't just facilitating the drug trade. He was running the factory that created the poison that killed his own town. The ledger confirmed Tom's worst suspicion. Sheriff Becker was on Thorne's payroll. He wasn't just lazy or complacent. He was an active participant, ensuring Lydia's case was dead on arrival and helping to funnel the dust directly into the community he was sworn to protect. The initials JD matched James D. Becker perfectly. The entry showed Becker was picking up 50 units, a sizable street quantity, every 10 days. He was either heavily addicted or, more likely, using his authority to run his own micro-distribution network in Harmony Creek. Tom leaned back, feeling the cold weight of the revelation. This wasn't just a local corruption story. This was a state-level conspiracy involving law enforcement and high-level politicians, all rooted in the toxic ruins of a once-proud industrial town. Lydia hadn't just seen a drug delivery. She had found the record of the entire operation. Tom knew he couldn't take this to the local police. They were the conspiracy. And going to the FBI without irrefutable proof and dealing with the bureaucratic red tape would give Thorne and Becker time to move the operation and destroy the original ledger. He needed a plan. He had to expose Becker and Thorne simultaneously, using a mechanism Thorne couldn't control. He remembered a key note in the ledger's final pages. A massive, final shipment labeled the Thanksgiving Harvest, a multi-state delivery scheduled for exactly 3 days from now, involving over 5,000 O units. This shipment was their weakness. If Tom could intercept it, or at least expose its route and true contents, he could bring the entire operation down. His first step, however, had to be confronting the one person who could potentially help him, the only person outside of the conspiracy who still had ties to official power: Muriel, the diner owner. She saw everything, and she hated what the dust had done to her town. Tom packed the ledger safely away. The next move had to be fast, surgical, and absolutely silent. He was no longer just an amateur investigator. He was a lone wolf facing the corrupt power structure of an entire region. Tom waited until the early morning, before the typical breakfast rush, to visit the Junction Diner again. He needed absolute privacy. Muriel was wiping down the counter, the only sound the clatter of porcelain and the hiss of the coffee machine. She barely glanced up when he sat down. "Coffee, Thomas?" she asked, without the usual sarcasm. "Something stronger, but coffee will do," he replied, sliding a small, laminated photo across the counter toward her. It was a picture he'd discreetly taken of the ledger page, showing the entry for JD.HC. Muriel stopped wiping. She picked up the photo, her hand trembling slightly. She studied the cryptic entry for a long minute. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice tight. "This is the truth about Lydia Mayhew," Tom said, keeping his voice low. "And the truth about Sheriff Becker." He quickly summarized his findings: the clandestine operation in the mill, the missing security footage, his confrontation with Douglas, and the meaning of the O units. "The mill isn't just a ruin, Muriel. It's the kitchen. And Becker isn't covering up a runaway. He's part of the distribution chain. JD.HC stands for James D. Becker, Harmony Creek. He's been using the supply to fuel the local addiction crisis." Muriel sat down heavily on the stool behind the counter. Her face was a landscape of betrayal and grief. "I knew it. I knew something was wrong. But Jimmy Becker, he was the golden boy. Always the respectable one. He's been bought and paid for by Thorne. But this isn't just about Becker. This ledger details a major, multi-state narcotics operation, Thorne, a state senator in Pennsylvania, and a massive criminal syndicate in Cleveland. It's a regional network of poison." Muriel pushed the picture away, her gaze distant. "The dust took my son, Tom. 2 years ago. They called it an accidental overdose. But he used to talk about getting hooked up at the local sheriff's fundraiser, for God's sake. Now I know why. Tom watched her carefully. Her pain was raw, but it was also a powerful, motivating force. Thorne is planning one final, massive shipment. They call it the Thanksgiving harvest. 3 days from now. If I can expose this shipment, if I can link Thorne Industrial to the chemical precursors and the narcotics, I can bring the whole network down. But I can't do it alone. What do you need? She asked, her voice stealing. I need eyes and ears inside the town's core. Someone who can verify Becker's movements and discreetly monitor Thorne's operations without alerting them. More importantly, I need access to the old town records. Thorne is using old, legally ambiguous land deeds to shield the mill property. The title clerk would never let me in, but they trust you. Muriel looked out the window at the bleak Main Street. She knew helping Tom meant risking everything. Her life, her diner, the few fragile connections she had left. She reached for the coffee pot, pouring him a refill. The county clerk's office is open at 9. Mrs. Higgins loves my apple pie recipe. You get me that pie, Thomas, and I'll get you the deeds. A tentative alliance, forged in the bitterness of coffee and shared loss. Tom finally felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't just a failed G-man anymore. He was a necessary shadow. The next morning, while Muriel secured access to the clerk's office, Tom focused on the logistics of the Thanksgiving harvest. The ledger indicated the shipment would leave from a remote, private rail spur on the far side of the mill property, where the old coal-loading docks used to be. The method was simple. Disguise the drugs as bulk industrial chemicals being shipped via freight rail across state lines. Muriel called him at noon. Got them, she said simply. Tom met her discreetly behind the town library. She handed him a thick, brittle envelope containing photocopies of the mill property deeds. Be careful with these. Thorne is protected by a maze of shell corporations and grandfather clauses, she warned. Tom spent the rest of the day analyzing the land records. He confirmed that Richard Thorne, through a holding company called Black Creek Reclamation, owned the mill itself and the adjacent rail spur. The paperwork was almost flawless, designed to keep environmental regulators and tax authorities at bay. But then, he found the flaw. The perfect, tiny legal crack Thorne had overlooked. The deed to the access road. The road leading to the remote rail spur wasn't owned by Thorne's company. It was a narrow, unpaved service road originally built by the county decades ago to service a long-forgotten mining venture upriver. The road was still technically designated as a Harmony Creek municipal easement. Thorne had assumed, given the town's decay and Becker's control, that the road was his. But legally, it was public access, maintained, theoretically, by the municipality. If Tom could prove the truck carrying the drugs, the harvest, was sitting on public property, then Sheriff Becker's local jurisdiction protection would be instantly compromised. Federal involvement could be triggered faster if the crime scene was on public, rather than private, land. This was his tick-tock moment, the legal precision needed to dismantle the network. He drove the pickup out to the remote rail spur at nightfall. The municipal easement road was barely a track, lined with dense, scrubby woods. It ended at a large, rusted steel gate, which bore a fresh, heavy-duty padlock, Thorne's attempt to assert ownership. But the key wasn't the gate, it was the access road itself. Tom hid his truck in the woods and walked the remaining half-mile. He found the rail spur, and there it was, a heavily camouflaged, large warehouse structure, hastily erected among the ruins of the coal loaders. Parked outside was a massive, dark semi-truck, its engine idling faintly. The truck was unmarked, except for a generic-looking federal DOT number. The Thanksgiving harvest was being prepped. He used a pair of powerful binoculars. 2 figures were moving between the warehouse and the truck. One was the large, unmistakable silhouette of Richard Thorne. The other was shorter, quicker, a new player. Tom snapped photos of the truck, the warehouse, and the surrounding area. He needed to establish the exact moment the truck moved onto the municipal easement road. He had to contact the FBI, but not the local field office, which might be compromised. He needed to go straight to his old boss, a division chief in Pittsburgh, who owed him a favor and understood the nuances of the Rust Belt's criminal geography. Tom retreated, the air charged with the anticipation of the coming storm. Back at the farmhouse, Tom prepared his evidence package. The ledger data, the photos of the truck, and the crucial municipal easement deed information. He knew making the call to Pittsburgh was risky. Thorne and Becker might be monitoring all known Vance contacts. He needed a secure, anonymous line. He drove 20 miles out of Harmony Creek to a decrepit highway stop, a truck stop called the 76er. He found an old, payphone booth tucked in a dark corner, a relic of a bygone era. He dialed the secured line he hadn't used in 3 years. Pittsburgh Field Office, Division Chief Hayes. "It's Vance. Tom Vance," he said, his voice flat. There was a long pause on the other end. "Vance, I thought you were gardening in Vermont. You sound like you're calling from the wrong side of the century. I'm in Harmony Creek, Ohio. I've stumbled into a major, multi-state drug trafficking ring disguised as an industrial reclamation project. The main players are Richard Thorne, a prominent industrialist, and the local law enforcement. Sheriff Becker." He summarized the evidence succinctly, focusing on the sheer volume of fentanyl, the involvement of a state senator, and the Thanksgiving harvest shipment details, including the legal loophole of the municipal easement road. Chief Hayes listened in silence. Tom knew the magnitude of the claim. Implicating an industrialist and a sheriff meant launching a major federal operation on thin evidence collected by a retired, potentially disgraced agent. "Vance, the optics on this are a nightmare. I need to know this isn't some conspiracy theory born from small-town resentment. I have the original ledger, Hayes. Handwritten. It names the buyers, the money launderers, and the specific distribution point. I'll give you the location of the municipal easement road where the truck will stage. You hit it there, it becomes an interstate narcotics seizure on public land. Clean jurisdiction." Hayes let out a weary sigh. "Give me the coordinates. I'm mobilizing a specialized task force from the Pittsburgh-Cleveland sector. We move in 8 hours. If this is wrong, Vance, your retirement is officially over, and you're going to prison for obstruction." "I'll be there," Tom promised. "I need you to know one more thing. They killed a girl, Lydia Mayhew, to protect this." She found the ledger. Hayes hung up without another word. The clock was ticking. Tom returned to Harmony Creek. He had about 6 hours before the FBI task force was scheduled to move in. He had to prepare his final move and ensure he wasn't intercepted before the federal raid. He drove past the Thorne apartments one last time. He saw a police cruiser parked casually near the entrance. Becker. Suddenly, his phone, a secure burner he'd activated, rang. It was Muriel. "Thomas, get out of there. Becker just came into the junction. He's agitated. He's asking about you, where you're staying, who you talked to." He mentioned the bolt cutters found by the river. "He found the bolt cutters?" Tom frowned. He thought he'd thrown them far enough. "And he just got a call." Muriel hurried on, her voice strained. "He's leaving now. He told one of his deputies. The boss wants the house secured. Now, the house. The Vance farmhouse." Thorne and Becker knew where he was staying, and they were likely heading there to wait for him, or worse, to search for the ledger. Douglas must have been awake and talked. Tom changed his plan instantly. He couldn't go back to the farmhouse. The ledger was hidden there, but going there now was suicide. He sped toward the municipal easement road. He had to get to the staging warehouse before the truck moved and before Thorne and Becker cornered him. When he reached the hidden turnoff, he killed the engine and coasted silently into the dense woods. He grabbed his old service handgun, a .45 he'd kept buried in a box, and checked the chamber. He was going in armed and alone. He approached the warehouse. The semi-truck was still idling. The shorter man he'd seen earlier, whom he now recognized as a known mercenary for hire from the Pittsburgh area, was standing guard by the loading dock. And then he heard a second vehicle approach rapidly on the dirt road. Not the slow, deliberate crawl of the FBI, but the aggressive churn of a familiar engine. It was Sheriff Becker's patrol car. Becker had prioritized the harvest over searching the farmhouse. He must have realized the stakes were too high to risk the shipment. Becker's cruiser screeched to a halt near the gate. Becker and a deputy jumped out, both heavily armed, heading toward the warehouse. "Thorne, we have a problem. The retired Fed, he's loose. We need to move the load now," Becker shouted. Tom realized the FBI was still an hour away. He was trapped between the conspirators and the ticking clock. He had to create a diversion, a catastrophic one, that would stop the harvest and force the FBI to act immediately, regardless of the jurisdiction. He looked around. The warehouse was built right next to the dilapidated coal loading infrastructure, a massive, unstable wooden trestle, and a series of abandoned fuel tanks. He saw his opportunity. The semi-truck was full of highly volatile chemical precursors, the very materials used to synthesize the fentanyl. If he could damage the truck or the tanks nearby, the resulting explosion would be undeniable proof of a massive illegal chemical operation. It was reckless, but it was the only way to save the investigation and expose Thorne. Tom moved like a shadow, creeping toward the abandoned fuel tanks. He pulled out his .45. Inside the warehouse, Tom could hear the hurried, panicked voices of Thorne, Becker, and the hired mercenary. "Get that truck moving," Thorne yelled. "If Vance has that ledger, we're done. That shipment is our only leverage." Tom reached the cluster of fuel tanks, which were old and clearly unstable. He aimed the .45 at the valve of the nearest tank and squeezed the trigger. Pop! The sound was muffled by the silencer, but the effect was immediate. A sickening hiss as pressurized diesel fuel began spraying out. The smell of fuel hit the air. "What was that?" Becker shouted inside the warehouse. "Firefight!" the mercenary yelled, instantly recognizing the suppressed shot. The mercenary burst out, rifle raised. Tom fired twice, hitting the mercenary in the shoulder and leg. The man collapsed with a grunt of pain. But Tom was out of cover. Becker and Thorne emerged from the warehouse. Becker immediately spotted Tom and raised his shotgun. "Drop it, Vance, or you die right here on this toxic dirt," Becker bellowed. Crash! Before Tom could respond, a figure moved with impossible speed from the deep shadows of the rusting coal trestle. The figure, lean and fast, slammed into Sheriff Becker from the side, knocking the shotgun away. Tom blinked, confused. This was not the FBI. The figure was a woman, masked and wearing dark clothing. She moved with practiced, almost martial arts precision, disabling Becker's deputy with a quick maneuver. She wrestled Becker to the ground, grabbing the shotgun. "Run, Thomas!" the woman shouted, her voice familiar, yet distorted by adrenaline. "Get to the trestle." It was Muriel, not the weary diner owner, but someone trained, someone lethal. "Muriel, what the hell?" Tom stammered. "The pie recipe, Thomas. I told you I'd get you the deeds." Muriel fired a warning shot from the shotgun toward Thorne, who scrambled back into the warehouse. "I'm the real Bishop. Now go." Muriel, the seemingly harmless diner owner, was not just an ally. She was the Bishop, mentioned in the ledger, but not the Cleveland distributor. She was a different, original Bishop, a former undercover operative who had been tracking the Thorne network for years, using the junction as her base of operations. Her son's death was her cover and her motivation. The original Bishop listed in the ledger was the new distributor she was trying to expose. Tom didn't hesitate. He trusted the urgency in her voice. He sprinted toward the unstable wooden trestle, a massive, rickety structure built over a deep gorge, aiming for a point directly above the waiting semi-truck. He reached the top of the trestle. Below him, the truck was still idling, its trailer filled with the Thanksgiving harvest. Suddenly, Thorne appeared at the base of the trestle, holding a flare gun. He was maniacal. "You lose, Vance. This shipment leaves now. Not if the trestle falls first." Tom screamed. He began firing his .45 into the structural support beams of the decades-old wooden trestle. Crack, crack, crack. Wood splintered, old steel groaned. Simultaneously, Thorne fired the flare gun directly at the leaking diesel tank. The flare ignited the fuel in a blinding, terrifying flash. The resulting explosion was immense, a shockwave that hit Tom even at the top of the trestle. The semi-truck was instantly engulfed in flames, the entire harvest of O units destroyed. The explosion severely compromised the already weakened trestle structure. With a terrifying screech of rusted metal and cracking wood, the entire structure began to collapse. Tom leaped just as the trestle gave way, plummeting into the dense underbrush of the gorge below. Tom lay stunned in the dirt, the smell of burning plastic and chemicals overwhelming him. Above, sirens began to wail in the distance. The Pittsburgh task force, finally arriving, alerted by the massive explosion that just rocked Harmony Creek. He staggered back toward the warehouse site. The scene was chaos. The warehouse was burning fiercely. The truck was a blazing ruin. He found Muriel, standing over a handcuffed Sheriff Becker. Becker was spitting mad, his face smeared with dirt and betrayal. You old witch. You ruined everything. Becker screamed at Muriel. You ruined Harmony Creek, Jimmy, Muriel said, her voice quiet and filled with finality. And you killed my boy. Thorne was nowhere to be seen. The FBI task force, led by Chief Hayes, arrived in force, securing the burning scene and detaining the mercenary and Becker. Hayes found Tom, covered in soot, leaning against a tree, holding his throbbing shoulder. Vance, what the hell did you do? Hayes demanded, surveying the wreckage. I secured the evidence, Chief, Tom said, his voice hoarse. That explosion was 5,000 units of uncut fentanyl, disguised as industrial cleaner, heading interstate. That's a federal crime on a state-level scale. He pointed at Becker. He was the local point man. And she, he gestured to Muriel, is an asset, deeply embedded. Muriel approached Hayes, her mask pulled down. I have years of intelligence, Chief. I infiltrated Thorne's lower operations after they killed my son. He used his mill to poison the entire state. The bishop in the ledger was my internal code name, stolen by the network. Hayes looked from the smoking wreckage to the former FBI agent and the lethal diner owner. He knew this mess was going to be an administrative nightmare, but the evidence was undeniable. The smoke rising above the creek was the smell of conviction. Tom remembered the ledger's final entry, the preacher, P., the state senator, who was responsible for the money laundering. Thorne was gone, but the network was still alive. Thorne ran, Tom told Hayes. But the money is still moving. You need to follow the pipeline to the preacher, State Senator Davies. Thorne is heading for his hideout in Pennsylvania. Hayes nodded grimly. We'll follow the money. And we'll get Thorne. The aftermath was slow and brutal. The fire was contained, but the entire mill site was declared a toxic disaster zone. The evidence was irrefutable. The combination of narcotics residue and precursor chemicals destroyed in the blast led to an immediate federal RICO and narcotics trafficking indictment against Richard Thorne, even in absentia. Becker was charged and confessed under pressure, turning over all his assets and implicating Senator Davies. Muriel, the true bishop, was granted full immunity for her cooperation, her identity as an operative kept secret. She returned to the junction, serving coffee with a new, quiet determination. Tom stayed long enough to testify before a federal grand jury. The investigation revealed that Lydia Mayhew had accidentally found a small, hidden safe containing the ledger in the mill ruins. She had photographed the crucial pages on her phone, the phone that had been the only thing missing from her locker. Douglas had intercepted her, confiscated the phone, and disposed of her body in one of the deep, toxic pits on the mill grounds, a spot Tom had never reached. Lydia's body was recovered, finally bringing a measure of closure to Sarah Mayhew. Tom finished fixing the Vance farmhouse. He didn't stay. Harmony Creek, Ohio, had swallowed too many souls, including a part of his own. His last morning in Harmony Creek, Tom stopped at the junction. Muriel served him his coffee. Where now, Thomas? She asked. Somewhere quiet, where the crimes are easy to see and the water runs clean. There is no such place in America anymore, Muriel replied, drawing a mug. The rust is everywhere. Tom nodded, accepting the truth. The American dream hadn't died in Harmony Creek. It had merely rusted, providing the perfect camouflage for the corruption that thrived beneath the surface. He had done his part. He'd ripped away the facade, exposing the poison. He put a $20 bill on the counter, for the coffee, and for the life she'd saved. He drove out of Harmony Creek, past the overgrown sign, the American heartbeat, now feeling less like a boast and more like a warning. He didn't look back. The ghost of Harmony Creek, the lost innocence, had finally settled. But the fight against the quiet rust was far from over.